Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon for Silk's webinar entitled, Why Can't You Understand Me? A Personal Look at Autism. So, again, I'm Shelley Richardson. I'm the director of the Statewide Independent Living Council. I'm a little past middle-aged white woman wearing glasses and red hair, sitting in my office. Some housekeeping before we go on. You will see that we have both a chat thing at the bottom. If you hover your um, pointer down at the bottom, you'll get a chat. You'll also get question and answer. If you're having some kind of technical difficulty or have questions about that, you will put that in the chat. If you have questions for Taylor, go ahead and put that in the question and answer. And I'm going to ask you to do it while he's speaking so that you don't forget what that question is and we can go back to it at the end of the presentation. So, also at the end of this webinar, we have a very quick 2-question poll. If you will please be kind enough to answer that poll, I would really appreciate it. And at the end also for questions, if for some reason you are unable to put your question and answer, we will ask you to raise hands and we will unmute you one at a time for your questions. So right now, I am really thrilled to have our speaker with us today. His name is Taylor Sweeting. He is a 37-year-old advocate for autism, Asperger's syndrome, and Marfan syndrome. He's based in Chatham, Illinois. He is also a staff member of Jacksonville Community Center for Independent Living. He has presented both across Illinois and nationally on topics including autism, Marfan syndrome, the connection between autism and connective tissue disorders, as well as disability pride and disability rights. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Taylor now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Um, so just a description of me. I am a younger man with black curly hair, glasses. I'm wearing a black shirt with an autism logo on it, and I'm sitting in my office. Um, just some quick things with me. This presentation is going to be pretty straightforward. I go through my different slides. Again, as Shelley said earlier, please hold your questions until the end, and we'll have a Q&A session after the presentation. And so with that, we'll go on ahead and we'll get started. So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart because I was diagnosed with autism when I was 3 years old. And at age 3, I had gone through several different diagnoses prior to getting the autism diagnosis, only because autism was a diagnosable condition. However, Asperger's syndrome at the time was not. And so I didn't necessarily fit the criteria for an autism diagnosis per se, but I did fit the criteria as for an Asperger's diagnosis. And so it came into existence in 1989, and that was the year I was diagnosed with autism. And so that's kind of my journey with it. I've obviously lived with it my whole life. And so it's something that I talk about and I try and advocate for because I understand the struggles that people who live with autism experience on the day, and I want to empower people who live with autism and those who have autistic individuals and loved ones in their life to be able to present the most accommodating and most acceptable environment for that person to live in. So, autism is a neurodevelopmental state of cognitive and emotional mental being. It can affect your social interaction, both your verbal and nonverbal communication. There is a sensory processing disorder with autism, and I'll talk more about that in detail later in the presentation. There is an issue with some coordination and motor skills. I apologize. You're not going to see my unicycle trick anytime soon because I don't have one. I am very uncoordinated. And as tall and lanky as I am, when I fall, I fall. It's like a tree falling down. So I always say that that's a thing that is with me is my coordination skills are very much affected by my autism. Autism can also cause overactive sensations or overstimulation. And I will talk again more about that later on in the presentation as well. There are some learning disabilities associated with autism, or my favorite one is above average intelligence. That's one of my favorite ones. There is a little bit of social awkwardness in autism. And then there's extreme interest in certain subjects and or objects. And I'll talk again more about that later in the presentation as well. But that to me is kind of the love language and really the key to understanding autism and really being a part of someone um, in your life with autism is, to speak their language, you have to know what their, extreme interest is. So I'll talk more about that later, but I always feel like that's one of the bigger parts about autism culture for sure. Is autism a new thing? I would argue that it's not. Obviously, we see a lot of talk about autism in the media, in the news, all just different kinds of areas. Autism is kind of the in thing to talk about. But it seems like, recently it's been more popular. It's been more of a big thing to talk about. But I would argue it's been around since the beginning of time. Autism was first named though in medical literature in the late 1930s, thanks to the research of Dr. Hans Asperger, who was in Austria under Nazi Germany, and Dr. Leo Kanner, who was based in America. Both were leading pediatric psychiatrists in their respective countries. Unfortunately, Dr. Asperger's work, though, was seized by Nazi Germany when the Germans took over Austria prior to World War II. And so his research had to pass sort of the unfortunate Nazi background check of, is this really something we want to be associated with? Do we want to fund this research? So Dr. Asperger had to do some quick wit thinking. He had to kind of do some, you know, uh, investigating as, how can I convince, them to continue to let me do my research? And so in his research time, he told the powers that be that he has only observed this autism condition, or as they called it back in the day, autistic psychopathy in the Aryan race. So, of course, that spoke their language, right? And so they said, yes, absolutely. Let's research this. Let's find out more about it. And as he was doing more research, Dr. Kanner was doing the same kind of research in America. And they never actually communicated with each other, but they did a lot of observation as far as medical literature and research papers that both of the gentlemen were writing in their respective countries. And they kind of noticed, I think we're researching the same thing. So they kind of bounced some ideas, back and forth as far as their research was concerned. Again, they never actually spoke, face to face or like wrote letters or anything, but they certainly had that connection. Unfortunately, though, Dr. Asperger's work, because it was Nazi sanctioned research, when the Allies came and invaded Germany, they also destroyed Dr. Asperger's work because it had the stamp of approval, unfortunately. So, because of that, Europe is kind of lagging in their autism research area because all the initial research done by Dr. Asperger was destroyed. And Dr. Kanner's work in America continued to thrive because his research obviously stayed and it became sort of the pioneering forefront for what autism was to be later coined and later researched. Um, Several years later, there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Bruno Bettelheim. Dr. Bettelheim, again, leading pediatric psychiatrist in his respective country. Dr. Bettelheim researched in, I believe it was Germany, and Dr. Bettelheim was tasked with talking with his patients about social norms and social like interactions. A lot of parents were bringing their children to Dr. Bettelheim saying, I can't get my child to make eye contact with me. I can't get my child to want to hug me or to be close to me. And so he was tasked with trying to figure out how he can better that social interaction between the children and the families. And unfortunately, he tried several different methods. He was working to try and use different therapies to get them engaged and really trying to, heighten that sense of social interaction with no avail. He finally got so fed up with it that he started using cattle prods to shock his patients and to force them to basically react to him if he couldn't get them to react to him, without the use of those. And he felt like that was like a huge step forward because he's like, I couldn't get them to even look at me. Now they're crying. Now they're scared. They're showing, interest in talking to me because they don't want to be shocked. And so he was presenting this research to families like, look, I can get your kid to interact with me. And unfortunately, you had a lot of parents that were like, thank God. I didn't know my child could interact. I didn't know my child had feelings. And so you had a lot of these parents who were sad that this was, the method they had to use in order to have their child interact with them. However, there was that sense of relief that their child wasn't just a robot or something, right? Thankfully, though, this research was very much looked at and sneered at by the scientific community, and his research was debunked, and he no longer was able to practice because of the abuse that he did to his patients. Although undocumented, though, autism is thought to have been present throughout history. Many early accounts link autism to that of the holy fools of Russia, prophets of Greek, Roman, and Celtic gods, tribal mystics. They all were thought to have been touched by the gods, was the sort of the title that these individuals were given. And the idea was that if a god came and interacted with a human being, their presence was so overwhelming and so powerful that it caused them to be in this state that maybe people couldn't understand or that was socially awkward or that they were unable to verbally communicate. That was kind of the idea. They were thought to have been like a divine rod of communication between the mortal world and the, immortal world of the gods. Unfortunately, though, the fear became if this is what happened when these individuals tried to interact with the gods and the wrath of the gods were incurred upon them, does that mean if we interact with them, that the wrath of the gods will also then be incurred upon us? So a lot of these individuals were shunned. They were pushed outside of the villages. They fed them, like they would throw food to them. They would, leave water out for them to drink. They wanted their blessings and their presence amongst the village. But as far as interacting with them, they didn't want to because they thought they would catch whatever it is that they had. So it was a really scary time for these individuals because some of them were revered to almost as if they were gods, but because of that, they were untouchable. And therefore, that sense of interaction, that sense of isolation was very real for a lot of these people throughout history. So if we're talking about autism and we're talking about that it's been around for, since the beginning of time, then that comes about the idea of, well, then where did it come from? If it's always been around, where did it come from? How did it happen? It was once theorized that autism is the result of neglectful parenting, particularly on the mother's part, coined a refrigerator mom. It always makes me sad because that was kind of the inference my mother was given when I was younger. It's this idea that if you had just loved your child a little bit more, then this wouldn't have happened to them. and that there's this guilt complex that the scientific community was kind of putting on parents and mothers in particular in saying, do you know why your child doesn't like hugs? Because you didn't give them enough when they were children. And so there was this blame game that they put on these parents. And it really took this sense of guilt, to the next level of, this is what I did to my child. And so a lot of parents and mothers in particular just went their whole lives feeling this sense of guilt of, what did I do? How could I have done this to my child? Um, Autism was also thought to have been linked to abnormal seismic activity. This was coining the term autism clusters. This was first really identified near the San Andreas Fault in California, kind of near the Silicon Valley area. What they were noticing is in these areas of seismic activity, there were these instances of more autism diagnoses, especially even after seismic activity would happen several months later, there seemed to be this uptick in, autism diagnosis. So they really were kind of interested in how this worked. A lot of research went into the idea of if seismic activity happens when a parent is still pregnant with their child, maybe that, activity caused there to be, some kind of interruption in development. Uh, I always joke with this because I'm on several different online groups for autism awareness, and in one of my support groups, we had talked for several weeks about making more shirts. We wanted to make like shirts for our group, and we were passing around ideas back and forth and sending, designs and whatnot. And we had sent in one of the people had sent in a design to the group saying, you know, since autism clusters kind of seems to be the thing, what if we put down, autism on the front of our shirt, and on the back we say shaken, not stirred? Obviously we didn't do that because someone goes, we're autistic, and that's very awkward, but even we can't get away with that. So we didn't make that shirt. However, every now and then that support group we still say autism shaken, not stirred. We're talking about autism clusters. um However, even though it has been disproven through decades of research in the medical field, there has never actually been an exact pinpointed cause of autism. Most scientists attribute autism now to genetics and external natural causes. Um, we mostly understand that there is a genetic component to autism, and I'll again talk more about that later in the presentation as to what maybe one of those genetic components could be. But there is a genetic component to autism that has been detected, but it's not a singular cause. It's not been, seen in every case of autism. So I guess what it comes down to is when you're diagnosed with autism, that's just who you are. We're not a puzzle to try and be solved. We're not something that, we're trying to figure out, why we are the way we are. We should be celebrated for being the way we are. And I think, if there's one thing I want you to take away with this presentation is I have pride in my autism, and I have a sense of ownership of my diagnosis that proves to me that without my autism, I wouldn't be who I am. If you know me personally, you know me, I'm a very quirky, very relatable person. I like to have fun with it. I obviously treat it as being something very serious in my life, but I understand, that autism isn't something that you have to be like, I'm sitting through a funeral or something, because it doesn't take away anything in my life, it adds to it. And I want that to be the same mindset that everybody else has. I want people to understand that autism is something to be celebrated, something to be looked at and seen as a good thing. Unfortunately, though, even though a lot of people with autism and a lot of people within our world see autism this way, there's unfortunately these guys. Vaccines cause autism. Oh my gosh. Okay, so obviously I don't subscribe to this idea. Um, there is a lot of talk, especially nowadays, about the instance of autism. The numbers are increasing, and there is this sense that, it's because we have so many toxins in our vaccines and in the environment around us. I'm here to say I didn't come from a syringe. I did not come from a syringe. I didn't come from a toxic waste dump, so, down the river or something. I was born autistic because that's what that's who I am. That's just a part of my genetic makeup. And rather than trying to pinpoint the cause on something as, you know, tedious as, oh, I got too many vaccines when I was a child is ridiculous. Um, there has been several research projects going into the idea that vaccines with the preservative thimerosal, which is a derivative of mercury, that is used as a preservative component in most childhood vaccines. And the thought was that higher levels of thimerosal led to nervous system damage, which then led to autism. Um, Through many, years of research and several different organized research studies, they found that thimerosal, levels, high can cause issues in the body, but it did not affect the nervous system in a way that would cause autism. So, good news, even though the medical field saw, this happening, they said, okay, so it doesn't cause autism, but it, causes these other issues. We're going to get rid of those. And so there was this big, thing about that, okay, so thimerosal was the cause of autism. They removed it anyway. So disproven, people. And I've always said that. It's like, you can't get autism from childhood vaccines. Unfortunately, those same groups of people then had to find another thing to blame. So they jumped right on the bandwagon of, well, then certain medications that the mother takes could be the cause of this. So they talked about Tylenol and Advil, other over-the-counter medications that could possibly be a contributor to autism. And so they really pushed this narrative of these external toxins was the cause of autism. And again, research has been done that taking these medications has no negative effect on the child as far as a neurological development. So I can't speak for anything else, but in this respect, it does not cause any neurological conditions that lead to autism. So I guess long and short of it, vaccines and medications, those kind of things, do not cause autism. I didn't come from a syringe. I didn't come from a pill bottle. I was born this way because that's what my genetics are. And other external factors, such as the environment or natural causes, is what led to me being born autistic. End of story. So there's my soapbox. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Um, we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit. And I'm gonna get into something that I'm really interested in. I'm gonna kind of nerd out for a little bit here. We're gonna talk a little bit about neuroscience. Particularly, I want to talk about brain waves. So, just kind of a quick crash course. There it goes. Blah. That social awkwardness is showing. Um, a little quick crash course on neuroscience. So the idea is when we think and when we have electrical energy and activity in our brain, it produces energy waves that are measurable with graphics and other ways that we're able to measure electrical energy output. And those waves determine the strength of the neurological activity going on inside someone's brain. And they're basically spaced out into these different levels. So there are gamma waves, which is hyperactivity, and that's when you're kind of in a state of heightened, awareness. You're learning and you're really taking in a lot of information, or maybe you're in a panic mode or anxiety, something is going on where your senses are heightened and really kind of in that overwhelming state. And then there is your beta waves. That is when you're engaged. You're having a conversation, you're in the middle of an activity, um, and maybe when you're learning basic stuff. My theory is that your guys' brainwaves on this Zoom should be somewhere in between the gamma and the beta wave, lengthwise. So hopefully you guys are tuned into that area and that's what's going on inside your brains. There's the alpha waves. Alpha waves is when you're relaxed. So think about like when you come home and you're relaxing on your easy chair, you're watching TV, you're getting ready to go to bed. This is as your brain is kind of winding down and you're starting to get relaxed. There's your theta waves, which is your dream state. So your brain is, actively resting. However, it's also processing information. So you're having dreams. And then finally, there's your delta waves, and that's your really deep sleep. That's when your brain is only functioning to basically keep homeostasis. Your heart is still beating, your lungs are still beating, you still have, blood circulation throughout the body, but other areas are shut down, they're resting. So somewhere in all of this brainwave activity, there is something called a mu wave. Now, a mu wave is basically a type of brainwave that acts as a video recording, kind of, for lack of a better term. And what happens is your brain emits mu waves when it learns something new. So, for example, when a child is learning how to tie their shoe, the first time they see someone tie their shoe, or when a person is showing them, okay, this is how you tie your shoe, their brain records that information and they record it through these mu waves. And so then what happens is as they continue to learn and they see more instances of, people tying their shoes or they're learning how to do it, that recording plays through their head and that's how they remember to do the process. And so the more visualization of it and the more, physical, repetition of it is how they're able to retain the information and the memory. And that's how they learn how to do something. So, an atypical mind or an autistic brain only utilizes mu waves during physical, tactile activity and not during a visualization. So, when you think about an autistic person, you sometimes see them fidgeting a lot. They'll fidget with their hands, or that's why they have like little fidget spinners and other, just different tactile fidgets that they have with their hands. That isn't just something that is there to create stimulation, um, repetition, or a sense of, relaxation for them. It's a way for them to actually utilize their brainwave activity and learn new things. So it's really super important when you're trying to teach or when you're trying to communicate with an autistic person to have them have something tactile in their hand. Um, One of the projects I've worked on in the past, working with local police forces, fire, like firemen and and EMTs, our first responders. Um, One of the projects I've worked on is presenting different departments and different organizations with tactile fidgets for interactions with autistic people because given in an emergency situation, it's a very overwhelming situation. They're in an emergency, they're scared, there's a lot of sirens going off and lights. It's just very overwhelming. But if you can give this person a fidget, and if they can have that fidget, they can hear and they can retain the information that they are hearing from the first responder more accurately, more clearly, and it allows them to have something to focus on versus everything going on around them. So that's one of the things that I tell people is I'm the kind of person that I have to have a fidget with me all the time. This is my office here at work, and I have this lovely bowl of fidgets that I keep in my office, constantly using these in different ways. And then for myself, also, since I was a child, I carry this. And I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but this is a soap dispenser straw. When I was a child, I learned that I loved to twirl those in my hand. And I got so into that that not only did I have them, but I started collecting them. So you can imagine as a child, I'm going to like restaurants, and if they have a thing of soap in their bathroom and it's almost gone, I'm going up to the front saying, "Hey, your soap is almost out, but could I get the straw out of your soap? Because I collect those." I always have a book bag with me, and in my book bag, among many other things, I have a rubber band thing of those plastic straws, and I have about 3 or 4 jars at home full of those things. So I always have extras in case I lose one, because Lord knows I lose them all the time. But that's a part of what I have learned is I am more focused, I'm more tuned in, and I can feel myself more focused when I have something to fidget. And when I fidget with that, I allow the mu waves to do their job and I can learn. So that's been one of my, I guess, tricks of the trade is I use my straw as my tactile fix in order to contribute and make my mu waves happen. Okay, autism and connective tissue disorders. So this is something that I've really kind of jumped into a little bit more as of recently. So without getting into too much detail, I was recently diagnosed with a condition called Marfan syndrome, which Marfan syndrome is a connective tissue disorder where there's a genetic mutation in the fibrillin gene of the body, which makes like connective tissues like muscles, tendons, bones, all those things. It causes there to be a weakness and a strain within the connective tissue. So a lot of those individuals are very tall, lanky, long fingers. You get the idea, people. So I didn't realize I had this. My mother always suspected that I had Marfan syndrome since I was a little boy, but I was never able to get a formal diagnosis until I had a doctor one day that officially diagnosed me with it. And we did the genetic tests, all the things, and I have Marfan syndrome. So when I talked earlier about the genetic component of autism, that's one of the genetic components. This genetic anomaly or this mutation in the genome of a person, um, which then affects the connective tissue of the body, what happens is if that same mutation not only affects the connective tissue of the body, but it also affects the connective tissue of the neurological system, that can manifest as autism. And so, what a lot of scientists have found is there are connective tissue disorders associated with autism, such as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Marfan syndrome is one of those as well. And that's a comorbidity that is associated with autism because the same mutation that can manifest into Ehlers-Danlos or to Marfan syndrome is also a genetic component that can cause autism if it affects the myelin tissue in the brain. So the myelin tissue acts as kind of like an insulator. So it's the gray and white matter in our brain. And interestingly enough, the myelin tissue in the brain is in most neurotypical people, there's just enough to insulate the neurons that allows for there to be controlled electrical activity in the brain. For autism, that myelin sheath is almost non-existent. So that person has an overactive brain. They use more percentage of their brain because there's no myelin tissue to insulate that information. So their brain is more programmed to think and to have more electrical activity. Um, Kind of on the other side of that spectrum, too, interestingly enough, for an individual that has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, there is an excessive amount of myelin sheath that is in their brain. So with Down syndrome, there is a larger percentage of myelin sheath, and that's partly why a person with Down syndrome is more likely to have Alzheimer's or develop Alzheimer's as they get older, because Alzheimer's is the deterioration over time of myelin sheath. So on the other side of that, I'm jumping all over, but on the other side of that, I will never develop Alzheimer's because I don't have myelin sheath to lose. I already have a lower amount of myelin. So if I start losing myelin, even the little bit I have, it's not going to affect me the same way it would if I had excessive amount of myelin or a percentage like most people do. So interesting to think, autism, is always looked at as kind of a maladaptive thing or something that, we talk about, oh, what causes it? Is it a toxin thing? I would argue that it's more of an evolutionary advantage, um, because it allows for that sense of a more brain connective adaptability. It allows for us to have bigger thinking processes. And ultimately, it allows us to be, free of those constrictions that the myelin sometimes creates for people. So kind of all over the place, but it's just really interesting to talk about the physical structure of the brain and how that, kind of translates into how it affects someone just with autism, but with other conditions as well. Okay. What are the numbers? So I'm not going to get too much into this because numbers are boring, but suffice to say, these numbers here reflect a what appears to be an increase in the numbers or the increase in the instances of autism in our culture. I would argue that while this really proves is that autism is being more recognized and there are more earlier interventions that we're discovering, and that we're really uh, adapting to. Like we're able to say, oh, okay, so we're recognizing autism at a younger age, we're understanding the complexities of the disorder. And so we're able to make those accommodations early so that it no longer is just a, maladaptive thing or a disability, but rather just a difference. So I always like looking at this figure because when I was first diagnosed with autism, the instance was 1 in 2,000 people. I went from 1 in 2,000 people to 1 in 36 people have a form of autism in the United States. That is a huge thing. And it's exciting for me because not only am I seeing more awareness, but I'm seeing more of an understanding of how autism really presents itself in our world today. I really like talking about this. So growing up with autism, I wasn't always as gung ho about it as I am today. Point in fact, I actually was a little embarrassed by it, and I didn't even like the word autism. I thought it made me different, and it prevented me from having relationships and friendships with friends and people because of that social awkwardness. And there was just this general disconnect that I really, really didn't like. So autism was not something I was really celebrating. It wasn't until I got older when I realized how influential autism is in my life, and I came to accept it. I came to accept that it was a part of who I was. And not only that, but I met other people with autism. I met other people within autistic culture. And because of that, I began to immerse myself in autistic culture. So I learned, things like the idea behind autistic first language. So for so many of us, obviously we work in the field of disabilities, and we are more than well adapted in the people first language culture, where we want to present this as a person and then their disability. We want to highlight the human aspect of someone versus just labeling them as having a disability. And that's amazing. I mean, that's a huge step forward in our culture, and that's very important. And I continue to highlight the importance of people first language. For autistic people, it's not offensive to call us that. It's not offensive to say autistic, an autistic person or autistic people, because I can't be separated from my autism. My autism is in my head. And so there's not a part of me that isn't autistic. Because last time I checked, the brain is supposed to be like the control center of the body. So when you think about it, not only does autism affect my behavior and my cognitive ability, but it also affects, again, my motor skills. It affects how my body functions. And ultimately, autism doesn't just affect me in my personal life, my personality, my behaviors. It also affects me physically. So, because of that, I can't separate my identity from my autism. So to say that I'm autistic, that's not offensive. That's just reality. And I think it's something that I've really come to embrace because autism is a huge part of who I am. And I continue to embrace it every day. By no means do I suffer from autism, or I refer to it as a disease. You know, it's nothing like that. Autism is just a part of who I am. And I I've had to learn to live with it. I've had to learn to adapt with it. Um, I've learned to embrace it. I've learned to accept not only that it's a part of who I am, but that it makes me who I am. And so, do I have an identity as a person? Absolutely. If you get to know me, you'll know there are many different facets about me, and I'm a very multifaceted person. I apologize to some of you because you're like, oh my gosh, are you ever? However, a big part of that is because my autism makes me the quirky, unique person that I am. And that's a part of what makes autism so influential and important for me, is that it makes me the quirky, unique person that I am, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Um, I like to celebrate Autistic Pride Day, which is on June 18th. We don't need a cure, we need acceptance. Um, there's a kind of a play on words where we say, that there's this idea about autism awareness. And so you hear all the time, oh, autism awareness, autism awareness. And I would argue when you throw out the concept of we need more autism awareness, I'd say we already figured it out. Because by saying we need more autism awareness, it's obvious that you're aware of autism and that we need more awareness of it. So I feel like the idea behind autism awareness is kind of a completing, self-fulfilling, kind of ideal. What we need is acceptance of autism. We're aware of it, so let's accept it. Let's find ways that we can integrate it into our culture even more and to embrace it for what it is. It's a huge part of our world, and so many influential people in our history and in our world today are autistic and have given, so much of themselves to, this world and what we, do as far as science and literature, art, all of those things. I really love this word, Taka Watanga. So Takawatanga is a Maori word that means in his or her own space and time. So the idea behind the word Takawatanga, that's kind of the Maori word for autism. So the Maori people is a culture within the South Pacific, particularly in New Zealand. And one of the things within Maori culture is when a child is born, the child is kind of given the once over after they're born. And when they're looking at this child and they see like certain physical features or certain parts of them that they can kind of identify as, hmm, oh, this kid has longer legs. That must mean they're going to be really good at running. This child should become a hunter. And so from a young age to their adulthood, they're kind of fed this idea that they're going to become a hunter. And so they're trained to be a efficient hunter and they're given all the tools and all the necessary, accommodations and trainings for it. So they become the most, you know, uh, well adapted hunter they can be. And so that's what the Maori culture does. They kind of assign duties to children after birth to kind of give them that sort of purpose in life. Well, what would happen in Maori culture is when the child was growing up, if they started noticing things like the child wasn't making eye contact, or if they would do things like putting things in lines or creating patterns, things like that, they immediately rebranded that child and said, oh, they're Takawatanga, which in their own space or time. And so what that did was instead of kind of purposefully, training them to become something, they allowed that child to blossom into their own in their own time and space. So instead of saying, oh, this child has to become a hunter, they'd say, oh, they're Takawatanga. Let's let them blossom in their own space and time. So they were still, trained on how to be a hunter, but they weren't pushed to be like, by this age, you should be able to do this and this. It was going to be in their own time, and they would take their own, space to make it happen. So it's kind of an interesting concept. And the Takawatanga really was an interesting sort of cultural thing from the Maori people. And that eventually continued on through the centuries of Maori culture until it became and blossomed into an organization called the Autistic Union. Now, this is an organization that was founded upon the principles of autistic culture, autistic pride, self-advocacy, neurodiversity, and neurointegration. Um, this organization blossomed out of the country of New Zealand, and the idea was it was a group of autistic people that kind of, again, lived in their own space and time, but they advocated for autism, they educated about autism, and they defended each other. Like we were able to say, oh, I'm going to stand up for this person with autism. We're going to advocate for this change. We're going to educate on this. This organization is something that I kind of stumbled upon really early on, kind of in my college career. And I was noticing all these people with the brand AU in their Facebook name. Um, Eventually, I was approached by the head of the organization, and he asked, do you want to become a member of the Autistic Union? So I went through this whole, kind of initiation process and learning the organization's values and the principles. And I was sworn in and became a member of the Autistic Union. And now I'm proud to say that since 2013, I have been the Illinois representative for the Autistic Union ever since. So I represent the state of Illinois through the Autistic Union. Um, and I do a lot of meetings with the different representatives across the country and across the globe. It's amazing to talk to other people from other countries about autism and how they truly see and view autism as a whole. It's just been a really cool experience. Um, Social media is primarily where autistic culture exists. Um, it really blossomed through social media, so like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, all of those. And the idea was social media is kind of like that barrier between face-to-face interaction and the ability to have an interaction with someone, but be able to kind of filter what it is you're going to say. If you have me on Facebook or any other social media site, you'll notice that anytime I post something or I message somebody, it always seems to be this beautifully articulate, masterpiece of wordery. Everyone always goes, "Oh my gosh, you're so well spoken." And part of it is I'm like, well, it's because I am. But the other part of it is, as an autistic person, um, I will type something out and I'll read it to myself and I'll be like, I don't like how that sounds. Delete, 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 delete. And then I'll type something else and I'll read that and I'm like, I don't like that. So I delete it and then I make all these adjustments. And so like for a conversation that should take 5 minutes, it takes me like 15 minutes or 20 minutes because I'm constantly changing things. I'm constantly revamping. But once I get the right verbiage and I send it, I'm like, yes, that's how it happens. I love that about social media because in real life, you got to be on your game. Like you got to be like, I got to say the right thing at the right time and in the right tone and the cadence and all that things. It's like, oh my gosh, it drives me insane. But that's part of that social awkwardness, right? And so that's one of the good benefits of social media is that it allows me to interact with people and I don't have to worry about that face-to-face interaction social awkwardness. Plus, social media allows me to do this cool thing where I can message someone and I'll send out my message. I've said what I wanted to say, and then there's this beautiful little X that's right, above their little chat box. I can exit and the person goes away. Like I can't do that in a face-to-face interaction because it's like I talk to the person and it's like I'm done talking to you. Go away. It's like I'm done. And it's like no, they want to sit there and they want to talk longer. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's like I love social media for that reason because then I could be like, sorry, I'm done. And then I do like the really awkward thing and like I'll exit out of the conversation and then they type again and it pops back up and I'm like, dude, I told you, conversation's over. So I exit the conversation again. And then there's those people that just keep coming back. They're like, no, 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 I had to ask you this question. I want to talk about this. I wanted this, blah, 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 blah. Then Facebook created this amazing thing called Take a Break. I loved it. So I'm like, sorry, buddy, you have three strikes. First time, second time, third time, sorry about you. We're taking a break for a week. So I hit the break button and I'm like, okay, we're done for a week. You come back after a week, then we'll see how things go. You do another strike against me. I'm like, okay, now we're gonna take a break for a month and continue to go down the line because I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's like that's one of the benefits of social media, right? And can we talk about emojis? How amazing emojis are? It drives me insane when people will put, like they'll talk about sending text messages or messages on Facebook or whatever, and they're like, well, I get so confused with how someone feels, or I can't tell what people are trying to infer. Like, are you trying to be sarcastic? Are you being this? People. I put like 12 emojis behind what I said, and there was a tongue stick out face, there was an eye roll emoji, there was a laughing emoji, there was, I don't know. I put all these different, things on there. And I'm like, that should have been the evidence that I was being sarcastic. I'm like, I could have made it more plain if I tried. And so I'm like, I feel like when I communicate on Facebook or when I communicate, on Snapchat or, Instagram, whatever, I'm pretty straightforward. And I put emojis in there because that's the best way to communicate how I'm feeling without having to go through all this detail of, well, what were you trying to say, Taylor? Were you being sarcastic? Were you being serious? Were you being funny? If I have five laughing faces after something and I put LOL, it's funny. Laugh, move on. Here we go. All right, so now this is the part where I transition, and I'm going to talk a little bit more kind of my personal experience with autism. Um, so these next several slides I'm going to do, the next 7 slides are going to kind of be focusing on that. And then once that's done, I'll the presentation will be over and we'll open things up to questions. Okay, so one of the first things I want to talk about is autistic self-image. How are we doing on time? We're amazing. Okay. So, as an autistic person, sometimes you find it difficult to grapple with the overwhelming negatives of society and the views it has on autism. So, since really the inception of the idea, like again, refrigerator moms and the inception behind, being, touched by the gods and you were unapproachable, people couldn't, come near you type of thing. Since the inception of that, there has always been this sort of negative connotation around autism and this idea that there's a burden associated with autism. Um, Without trying to get into anything political, obviously, we have experienced in our recent times, there's been a lot of negative flack thrown at, autism, particularly talking about the negative aspects of it, that it causes, issues within families, they're not contributing to society, those kinds of things. Um, Really just a lot of downplaying of autism and the self-image of autistic people. That's not easy to live with. It's very difficult to live in a world that sometimes views you as being difficult to be around. Because as an autistic person, that's not my intention at all. I don't want to be difficult. I don't want to cause problems. I'm just experiencing the world through my lens. And unfortunately, sometimes that translates as there's some negativity that's associated with it. So unfortunately, that autistic self-image sometimes can be very damaged. And that sense of negativity is something that we internalize. So suffice to say, I can't stress to you enough. Again, the idea we don't need autism awareness, we need autism acceptance. Um, People with autism need to hear that yes, things can be difficult sometimes. That's just reality. We don't want to sugarcoat something and rainbows, sunshines, unicorns, and rainbows, but we also don't want to, paint, this dark picture of doom and gloom, right? Let's look at it from a realistic standpoint. There are some struggles. We can get through those, but you are a valued person. You're a valued person. I accept you, and I accept that autism is a part of who you are. It makes you who you are. And for that, you are loved. And to me, that's one of the biggest, most powerful messages that I can push forward when it comes to autism awareness is we need to look at autism in the respect that just because it can be difficult sometimes doesn't mean that it has value. And that value isn't just value in autism itself. It's value in that an autistic person is just that. They're a person. And when we look at them as a unique person that brings quirkiness, that brings value and brings a sense of joy, you know, I met so many people that, know autistic people in their life, and very seldom do I ever hear them say, "Oh my gosh, the way they, the way they stem is just so annoying." Or, whenever they get repetitious in their words, it's just, oh, it just irritates me. You don't hear that. You hear like, "Oh my gosh, they're so funny," or "Oh my gosh, they love to give me a hard time. They like to joke and play around, and that they're always happy. They bring the sense of joy." You know, that's what makes autism great. And that's what makes it something that needs to be celebrated, because we can spend all day trying to pinpoint the negative, But rather than that, why can't we look at something from a positive standpoint and understand that the impact of autism isn't a negative one, but it's one of importance, and it's one that the impact is changing. It's life changing. And it's one that can add to life, not take away from it. Autistic special interest. So, this is a fun topic because if you know anyone who's autistic, and if you don't, hey, guess what? You just met one. Um, we love talking about our special interests. Now, I'm sure most of you who are thinking about someone who's autistic right now, you can immediately jump to, oh, I know what their special interest is. And you think, oh, they talk about this all the time. And it's so funny and it's so cute and it's this and da 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 da. Well, I'm here to say, yes, it is cute. It is funny. I mean, I know I am, I'm humble about it, but it is what it is. However, it's also a form of our deepest connection and our deepest love language. It's our personal language. For those of you who do know me, you could probably think off the top of your head, oh, what's Taylor's special interest? Batman. Batman is my special interest. Now, it's not my only special interest, but it's probably my biggest one. And it's funny because, you know, Batman is something that I can remember since I was a little child. It's one of my first memories is Batman, talking about Batman, getting excited about Batman. Batman was my first word, for crying out loud. So it's a huge part of my life. But what's interesting about that is that special interest is honestly what inspired me to go into the field of social work and to pursue going to get my bachelor's and working on my education. So when I was younger, I loved Batman the animated series. It was one of my favorite shows. Well, I would watch that and I continued to, immerse myself in the show and I was watching the episodes and everything. And one day it just kind of dawned on me. And I had to ask my mom, I said, why is it that Batman's villains never go to prison? They go to Arkham Asylum. I was like, first off, what is Arkham Asylum? What is that? And of course, then mom explained kind of what, that was. And she said, that Arkham Asylum is a place where people with mental health, like an asylum is where people with mental health um, issues go and they receive treatment. Of course, I'm like, huh. I was like, so what is that? Like, what does that mean? And so I was asking her all these questions about it. And I was just really interested in the whole concept. And as I'm talking about this, I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, a hospital that helps people that are, mentally, ill, and it's a place where people go, to get better. It has this, very caring sort of feel to it. And so I was really, kind of sucked into that idea. Well, then she goes, well, I mean, these places are real. And I'm like, whoa, 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 time out. They're real? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, so there are really asylums in the world. And she goes, well, they're not called asylums. They're mental health facilities or psychiatric wards. But yes, there are mental health facilities. And I'm like, hold up. So these places are real and people really go to these places. Yes, Taylor. So people actually have mental illness. Yes, that's not made up. No, that's not made up. Now, mind you, in my little head, I'm over here grappling with the reality that, hold up. So the Joker, Two-Face, Harley Quinn, the Scarecrow, those guys are real? Like that's real? And so I'm like, hold up. So there are actually people out there that have those disorders. So I'm like asking, like, okay, so Two-Face. I remember one episode they said he had split personality. Is that a real thing? That's a real thing, Taylor. Well, I was in like cloud nine. I was like, this is amazing. So I started doing my own research and I was like, ooh, I want to learn more about mental health. I want to learn more about, mental health disorders and all those things. And I really pursued that special interest. And finally, one day I said, okay, these places exist. This stuff is real. What do you have to do to work in a place like that? Now, of course, at the time, mom's like, I don't really know. And she's like, I mean, you could work as a nurse, you could work as an orderly, or um, she's like, there are social workers, there are psychiatrists. Now, of course, in my head, she's saying all this, and I'm like, well, I don't want to be a nurse. I was like, because my mom's a nurse. I said, my mom's a girl. So I was like, in my head, I was like, nurses are girls. Obviously, that's not the truth, that's not the situation. But in my little head, that's what I thought. But then I thought, social workers. I have a social worker at school, and I have a girl social worker, and I have a boy social worker. So that sounds like a cool job. Like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a social worker. And so I went and saw my social worker at school, and I told my social worker, I said, so I want your job. How do I get your job? Like, not your job specifically, but I want to be what you are. I want to be a social worker. And so I did a lot of research and I talked to this person and I learned kind of the steps I had to take, and that became my goal. But so all that, all that detail to bring to this point, my special interest led me to the idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that is the key to success. That is how autistic people learn where their point in the world is. And so when I talk about special interests with people, I'm like, it's the love language, but it's the key. It is the key to opening autistic people's potential and the success that they have. If you can tap into their special interest and it has a valid, tangible um, job or profession in the world, go for it. So, for those of you who don't know, I have a stepson. My stepson is autistic, and his special interest is buses, school buses. Loves school buses. Um, in fact, even in his room, he has a line of school buses that he keeps in his room that he's written the numbers of the buses from his school on. And every day when he comes home from school, he runs in his room and he adjusts the buses in their bus line if the buses lined up differently at school than they normally do. He's that into it and he's that focused. And he loves the buses. He gets to, when he comes out of school, he starts on the far end of the school and walks up the bus line and sees every bus. And so he can see every number like, okay, you're where you're supposed to be, you're where you're supposed to be, you're where you're supposed to be. You're not. You're not where you're supposed to be. But that makes sense because you're a sub bus driver. You don't know what you're doing. So he comes home and he has to switch the buses around because he's like, someone didn't do their job right. And, there it is. But I'm excited for Hunter because the idea is I hope someday he can get a job working at either the school bus barn or working, for Springfield Mass Transit, something with buses. I envision him having a job working in, transportation someday. And I hope, not necessarily like, that he'd be a bus driver, but like that he could work as a dispatcher or he could work helping to clean the buses or going through and, repairing things of that nature. I really hope that one day he gets to have that experience. But I think if you tap into that potential, that's what's going to unlock that success. And I want nothing but that success for my stepson because that's his special interest. That's what he loves. And I can see him whipping that bus barn back into shape. I mean, I guarantee you, if he was the one in charge, there wouldn't be a single bus late. There would never be a single bus out of line. And everyone would know where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be, and how fast they're supposed to go, all the things. So no matter what job he gets, obviously he'll be great at and he'll do amazing. but I really hope one day he can get a job working with either school buses or mass transit buses, some kind of bus system and transportation, because that's his special interest, and I can't wait to see what he does with it. Okay, so now the next several slides, we're going to talk about overstimulation. Now, I've been jabbering a lot here, but one of these slides, I have a video that I'm going to play. I will give you kind of more detail when we get there, but this is not a video I want you to see, but I want you to listen. Obviously, our closed captioning will be able to capture a lot of the words and stuff that they use to describe the video because there is a voiceover that describes what's happening in the video. But I want you to listen. And I want you particularly to take in the sensory experience because that's a part of the overstimulation sort of demonstration. Once we get through these, then I'll open up the floor to questions. Okay, so sight. The first sentence I'm going to talk about is sight. So, and this is kind of fun because normally when I give this presentation, I'm giving it, in person. So I look out into the crowd and I see a lot of different people and particularly people what like they're wearing. Now obviously the shirt that I'm wearing right now is a shirt. It's a black shirt. It's got, the design on it. It says Autism World Tour. Um, this is probably a little bit more busy than what I'm normally wearing, but typically I wear shirts that are, solid colors, not a lot of patterns type of thing. I am the kind of person I cannot stand a lot of patterns or a lot of stuff going on clothes. It drives me nuts, actually. Nothing is worse than when someone wears one of those god awful shirts that's got like the zebra stripes and the leopard skin spots, and it's all this mess on their shirt. I'm like, oh my gosh, I could throw up. It's not that I don't like it, it's that it's so distracting. And because I'm such a visual person, I have to process everything that I see. And so when I'm trying to talk to somebody or I'm interacting with somebody, if I'm looking at you and you have a busy shirt, I'm not going to be looking up at your face. I'm going to be looking at your shirt. And so even when I was a little kid in school, it was written in my IEP that if you're going to work with Taylor, you have to wear solid colored shirts or something solid because if you don't, Taylor's not going to pay attention to a word you say because he's going to be too busy checking you out. And I'll even say, I can't hear you over your loud clothes. Your clothes are too loud. I can't concentrate. And so that was something that I learned a long time ago. And actually, here at my job, that's one of the rules at our office. I don't care what you wear, but if you're going to come have a meeting with me, you either are going to have to wear a solid colored shirt or I have a bunch of little cardigans that I keep, in my office at the front door. So I'm like, grab one of the cardigans, put it on, cover that mess up so I can have a conversation with you. So I'm not, checking out your design. I can actually talk to you. Um, that's just one of the rules that I have. Um, that's something that I learned about myself a long time ago. But colors, patterns, those kinds of things, really distracting for me. And I'm the kind of person that when I have to do, things with people, I want to make sure that I give them my full attention. So I'm like, I have to be able to digest what you're wearing, though. And if you're wearing this crazy stuff, I can't pay attention to you. So let's meet somewhere in the middle and put that cardigan on so we can have a conversation. Anyway, smell. So smell is a big one. For me, everything smells like it's in the immediate area. And it's not necessarily an issue of things that smell bad, but just anything. Um, Air fresheners are a nightmare for me. I cannot stand air fresheners. Now we do have air fresheners at my apartment, but I control those, and those are kind of designed to be, accommodating for my needs. But as far as like the ones like you walk in front of and they got the little sensors, so every time it, walks past you, it's got that little shoot of perfume that goes, and it shoots up and it makes that little smell. I'm like Mission Impossible, like Indiana Jones, trying to get past all the traps, in the Temple of Doom because I'm like, oh my gosh, if I get past that thing, it's going to shoot this god awful, scent up in the air. So I'm constantly trying to avoid those things and like putting a piece of paper in front of it so it doesn't, sense my presence. Um, I'm the kind of person also that scents are something that allow me to do something comfortably or uncomfortably. So a quick story about me when I was a child. For several months, my mother was having a hard time getting me to eat. And it was really starting to kind of bum her out because she's like, I was making, my favorite meals and really trying to accommodate, my needs and everything was going on with me. So we're trying to, do the right thing and, make the things that I enjoy. But I kept telling her, I'm like, the food smells bad. I can't eat this. It smells bad. And it was really kind of starting to hurt her feelings, actually. Um, and we didn't understand what it was, and I couldn't help it. I mean, it is what it is. Well, when she went shopping once, instead of buying Dawn dish soap, she bought like an off-brand dish soap. And so, that was that. About a week or so later, I started eating food again. No problems. I was smelling the soap residue on the dishes, and that was preventing me from being able to eat the food that was on the dishes. That one little difference is what changed everything for me. Now, for example, let's say I was a student who was nonverbal and you're my para. You're as my para, let's say you've always washed your hair with a particular kind of soap. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you. So like, well, that's just what I've always done, right? Well, as your student, I recognize that smell. I recognize that's the smell of your shampoo. I'm like, that's your shampoo. Well, then one day when you go shopping, they don't have your shampoo. So you just buy a different kind of shampoo. It's no big deal, right? So you do that, you get your different shampoo, you use it, you come into school the next day, I'm having behaviors. I'm screaming, I'm not being cooperative, I'm hitting, I'm having a complete meltdown. For what? Like we can't understand why. You don't smell like you normally smell. I can see it's you, I can hear it's you, I know it's you, but you don't smell like you, and that's a problem. That one little thing, that one small detail is going to throw me off the rest of the day. And if I'm nonverbal, how am I going to tell you that? I can't I can't verbally tell you those things. So how am I going to say it to you? I'm going to have a behavior. I don't want you around me. I'm mad at you. So I'm going to hit you. I'm going to scream. I'm going to run. I'm going to elope. And if you come after me, I'm running faster because I don't want to be around you. Those little differences within the autistic mind aren't as clear to neurotypical people, but it's something that is kind of second nature to me. And so when I see a lot of these behaviors, I have to ask, okay, if there's nothing immediately within the immediate area that we can detect that would be an issue, let's talk about something necessarily maybe that's going on at home or something happening with you. And again, it could be something as simple as you changed the soap, you did this differently, you did this routine differently, those kind of things. Those little things are a huge, huge impact on that child. Okay. So this is the part where I do the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this video um taken up here. Now, oops, and I don't know if it's going to let me do this or not. I don't think it's going to let me do it. Uh-oh. Well, that's okay.
Taylor, this is Tara. I can try and share on this end.
No, that'd be great if you could do that, Tara.
Do autistic women present differently than autistic men? Sometimes they do, and in this video, we're going to talk about autism traits in women. There's differences across the autism spectrum, but
I don't think this is the right video. I'll tell you what. I'm going to send out this presentation to you guys. So I've sent it to Tara, and I think she's going to send this as a copy to everybody after the presentation's over. So when you do that, please check out this video. I'll just give you a quick kind of demonstration of what that video is. So it gives you an idea of what it's like to be in school and have a sensory overload experience in school. The main thing is I want you to hear all the things happening because it's a very loud video, but it gives you a good idea of what it's like to be autistic in a school setting. And ultimately, when you're listening to this video, I want you to consider that this is something that as an autistic person, I experience every day. Everything that I hear sounds like it's happening in the immediate area, and it's turned up to the loudest sound that it can be. So I'm hearing things like I can hear all the cars outside. I can hear, if people are outside mowing or doing stuff outside, I can hear that. If people are having conversations outside the building, I can hear that. People having conversations in the hallway or in their offices, I can hear those. People typing on their computer, all the things. I hear those things all the time. And I guess suffice to say, the reason I play that video and why, I want you to watch that video when you guys get this presentation in your email is I want you to have the experience of knowing what it feels like to have, that autistic experience, not so you can feel sorry for us necessarily, but to just understand what our experience is like. Because it can be very overwhelming. And if you're able to relate to us, even for just a little bit, it really helps to kind of bring you to this understanding and this level of, being able to say, oh, I get it. Like I get, why this would be so overwhelming for you. Taste is a huge.
Taylor, I have a question.
Yes.
Is it the YouTube Autism Ontario Sounds of the School Hallway, the Autistic Sensory Experience, Part 5 of 8?
Hold on. Let me go back and
I think this is Tara again. I think I've got it this time. You want me to try?
Yeah, please.
I want to share with you my favorite, mind-blowing
All people with autism have a difficult time relating to and connecting with other people. They live in a world that's very unpredictable and oftentimes scary for them. Going places and doing things that come very easily to us can be very overwhelming for them. The way they process information is drastically different. They see differently, feel differently, smell differently, taste differently, and hear differently. They are constantly being barraged with sights, sounds, and smells that can cause all kinds of overstimulation, distraction, pain, discomfort, and fear. If you know someone with autism, you've probably seen them cover their ears, hum to themselves, yell or cry or scream or run when there's somewhere there's a lot of noise. Sometimes they'll do it in a place that, in your opinion, is pretty quiet. People with autism hear everything in the immediate and not so immediate area, all at the same volume. School is an environment where kids with autism have a really rough time. Imagine this. On a typical day at school, you'll hear kids talking and laughing in the hallway, bells ringing, lockers slamming, flagpoles clanging, shoes squeaking, books falling, whistles blowing, iPods blaring, markers on a whiteboard, buses braking and hissing and engines humming and motors roaring, horns honking, doors slamming, hand dryers blowing, squeaking chairs and desks. Now imagine imagine you're sitting in a sixth grade classroom and all of these noises are pounding into your brain, all at the same volume, and the teacher starts asking you questions. Questions that should be pretty simple for a sixth grader to answer. What is one of the most important functions of microorganisms in an ecosystem? 2x plus 3y equals 12. What is the value of x? What is the term of office for a member of the House of Representatives? Karen broke a plate while she washed dishes. What's the noun in that sentence? What's 25% of 300? Name the 4 oceans of the earth according to size, largest to smallest. That's sixth grade. Imagine high school, college, or being a 5-year-old in a loud and crazy kindergarten classroom. People with autism are bombarded with information, nonstop questions, and requests all day at school, all with so much noise in their heads. And all day, every day, they are doing the best that they can in a world that they see, smell, taste, feel, and hear differently than the rest of us.
All right. Are we back on?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Um, that video always gets me. So again, powerful video, right? But it demonstrates how difficult and how crazy that overstimulation can feel. And again, I play that video because I want people to have this sense of understanding and this sense of um, feeling of what it's like to be a child with autism in a school setting. Um, and it's very powerful because when I play that video, I usually look out into the crowd and I can see people, like they're wincing or they're, trying to put their hands over their ears, and it's a lot. And then I hit, the off button, and suddenly everyone's back, to center, and they're able to kind of calm down and kind of get, back, assimilated to what they're doing. I don't get that option. That's what my world sounds like all the time. And I tell people that, again, not so that I can get sympathy, but so people can understand and people can relate to what it is that I'm experiencing, so that you understand this isn't just me trying to be difficult or me trying to come up with excuses. This is what I'm experiencing. Again, taste, huge one. Taste is one of those things that when I eat something, it usually sticks with me the rest of the day. So I always use the example: when I brush my teeth in the morning, I am tasting toothpaste. Then I eat breakfast. Then usually I'm tasting toothpaste and breakfast. I get to work. Usually I have kind of like a mid-morning snack. So I'm tasting toothpaste, breakfast, mid-morning snack. Then I have lunch. Toothpaste, breakfast, snack, lunch. You get the idea, right? That's an all day, everyday thing. And typically it takes a full night of sleep to kind of reset my taste buds so that the next day I kind of start all over again. I'm a huge gum chewer, so that's why I have a picture of gum sitting there, because gum is the way that I can kind of reset myself, and it provides that temporary relief when I'm chewing something, because otherwise I'm just sitting there tasting all this, food the rest of the day, and it's like, ugh, if I don't like it, then that's really going to set me off the rest of the day, right? When I go to restaurants, I always order the same food every time I go. It's really funny because, like, we'll go to a restaurant and if we go there enough, the people know my order, so they don't even ask me what I want anymore. They just bring me my drink, and they're like, "Okay, well, we got your food, going." And sometimes it's kind of annoying for my family because they're like, "Well, we don't know what we want." They're like, "But they're already putting Taylor's order in." Um, that's because I don't change. I know what I like and I stick with it. And that sometimes is an issue, for other autistic kids, is like, well, it's a sensory thing as well, but for some of us, it's also a taste thing. Touch is a big one. Um, you don't realize how much, or how many things are touching you until that touch is irritating. And you feel like that sense of discomfort, that sense of, almost claustrophobia in your own clothes. I hate the way, at the end of the day, I've been wearing, my clothes all day, and it's becoming like, oh my gosh, like I can't wait to come home, take off my shoes, my socks, get into something more comfortable. Um, I'm the kind of person that, I'm all about comfort. So I'll wear clothes that are more baggy, more bigger on me, so that there's more room and it's not as, cumbersome. Um, I believe in comfort over style. So that's kind of what my style of clothing is. But yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. And comfort is a huge aspect of it. But touch, you don't realize how much is touching you until it does, until you have that sense of pain and that sense of irritation that the oversensory can cause. So there's a lot of that as well with that. So those are the five senses. I talk about those because that's a personal experience with autism. As you get older, you kind of learn coping skills to handle those, and you can be more prepared, more assimilated to the experience. But it's something that also it doesn't go away. Like with autism, that's the other thing. You hear a lot about childhood autism, and you hear about, you know, interventions for people with autism when they're children. But it's like, for whatever reason, society has this idea that when you get, over the age of 13, that suddenly autism just disappears. That, from, at age of 12, you get to 13, beyond 13, it no longer exists. And it's like, that couldn't be further from the truth. Um, I'm just as autistic today as I was the day I was born. So those experiences never go away. And that's the other thing that I try and advocate about is the sensory experiences I have continue even to this day. Well, that's a big time trip down the rabbit hole, right? But I'm going to leave you with this question. Now, do you understand me? Do you understand what it's like to have that autism experience? Maybe not fully to the fullest extent, but at least you have an idea as to some of those experiences and how those affect me. Um, this is my contact information. And again, we'll be sending out this presentation to everybody for an email. And obviously, you can write down my contact information right now. So if you have questions and you want to contact me, personally, anything like that, feel free to do so. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Snapchat. Um, and you can always call me here at my office, JSIL. Just ask for Taylor when you call. You can email me here at work. Any of those things, you can email me personally. But thank you so much for your attention. And now I'm going to open the floor to questions.
You weren't sharing anymore, Taylor. Sorry, this is Tara. So I'm just going to pop that up. I think everybody can see it.
Okay.
And I do have a couple questions here.
Okay.
I will stop. I will let everybody look at that real quick.
Yeah.
While she's doing that, I do have a question, Taylor.
Yes.
How do you react to paint colors in a room? I mean, if you walked into a room with a bright red paint, would that distract you? I know it may sound like a silly question, but I was wondering that.
No, absolutely. I'm very much a cool colors kind of person. So yeah, I'm really big on like the color of rooms, carpets, flooring, things like that. If carpets have a lot of crazy designs, that's really distracting to me and I can't concentrate very easily. I try and if I am in a room that's got a lot of loud colors like reds or oranges, things like that, I try and stay away from those. Um, like my office has white walls and it's kind of like a green flooring. So those are more cooling, calming colors. So that's kind of what I try and stick with. And I don't turn the lights on in my office very often. So I use natural light like from my windows and stuff. So that's the other thing too is lighting is a very big thing for me as well.
We do have a couple questions on the Q&A. Taylor,
Okay.
first, as a child, did you feel or sense the stigma your mother received?
Yes. The biggest thing for me, and as far as what my mother was experiencing, my mother was always um overly apologetic to me, or she would sometimes address, me like, you know, I'm sorry, this is all my fault, this is what I did, type of thing.
Oh,
Um, the biggest issue I think that it caused was this idea that every time something would, quote, go wrong or a misstep of some kind, that's when it would always come back to, well, it's because of this, it's because of autism. And that kind of contributed to my aversion to autism, like why I didn't like it, because I'm like, I didn't know that I was different. I had no idea. Um, I saw everybody else and I assumed that they saw the world the way I did. So when I found out that I had autism, I was a little mad because it's like, well, what do you mean? I'm different? And I hated that idea. And I hated that it had a name, and that name just, it was like fingernails on a chalkboard. So for me, it was that sense of taking a negative view of autism versus trying to just portray it as just being a part of who I am.
And the next question is, there is some in the autism community that believe autism is a race. Do you believe that being autistic is being a part of a race, or are we united enough to be a race due to shared cultures and ways of life? Why or why not?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm not gonna lie, I do kind of subscribe to the idea that autism is an evolutionary um thing. I believe, that through the years of development that humans are developing a more higher form of thinking and a higher form of neuroactivity, and that's what I think autism is. But I don't go to the extreme of autism being a race simply because I don't think I can't say that as autism that we share things like we share complete cultural connection or like language connection, things of that nature. Because if you've met someone with autism, you know that like the way I communicate is one way, but the way they communicate may be their own style, right? So that's why I love the idea of Takawatanga. So it's not that we're a race, but we're a tribe. We're a neuro tribe. And that's how I like to view autism, as we're a neuro tribe, or we're a union. We're an autistic union. And we bring different colorful, multifaceted aspects to this tribe and to our culture. And so that's how I choose to view autism is, yes, we may have some genetic, evolutionary differences that make us different to our neurotypical counterparts. But I believe that we're more of a tribe, more of a culture and union versus an actual race.
hmm. Well, I want to open it up now. If you were unable to type in the question and answer, if you would like to, down at the bottom, move your clicker down there and you'll see the icon says raise hand. And if you want to raise your hand, Tara will unmute you and allow you to ask your question.
Oh, we have one. Go for it, Kevin.
Hi, Taylor. Sorry, I don't know if so my question is what is your best strategies when somebody is having maybe sensory overload and sensory processing as we kind of work with consumers with disabilities And I'll just be transparent. I do suffer from sensory overload myself. So I always try to see what guidance I can get for myself and people I serve.
Hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important when it comes to sensory overload, and I think creating that sense of coping with sensory overload, it's a very personal journey. So what may be overwhelming for one person may not necessarily be overwhelming for someone else. So one of the things that I tell people is listen to your senses. If you notice that something is bothering you, really kind of mold your response based on that feeling. So, for example, for me with the shirts, okay, when I noticed people had clothing that had a lot of stuff going on, you know, I was lucky enough that I was verbal and I could say, I can't hear you over your loud clothing, like I had that ability. And I use that as my, tool to make my point. Unfortunately, for some kids, because they're nonverbal, their only method of communication may be through behavior, through physical contact, and those means. So that's how they're communicating, right? Every behavior is a communication. There's never a behavior that happens in a vacuum. It's all meant to communicate something. So one of the things I tell people is when you notice a behavior or when you notice something with a person with autism, it is usually based off of a reaction they're having from a sensory experience or a perception ish situation happening with them. So an interaction or a sensory situation. And I usually ask to describe the feeling, or can you give me an idea? One of the things I tell I had some students that were nonverbal when they were upset, and I would ask them, is it because something is bothering you? And if they could indicate to me, yes, something's bothering me, I would say, can you show me where it's bothering you? And and sometimes kids will be able to be like they point to their eyes, or they put their hands over their nose, or they do something, to indicate like, oh, it's loud. And I'm like, okay, so that's what's going on. I think transparency is huge, but I think being able to personalize your journey and create that sense of openness of nothing is taboo. If you think this room is overwhelming, the last thing I want to hear is someone go, no, it's not. I heard that so much when I was a child of, Taylor, this room isn't bright. I'm telling people it's bright. I'm like, I can't concentrate. They took that as me trying to be complicated or me trying to say, oh, I don't want to do this. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I was just trying to tell you that it's overwhelming. So being able to focus on the individual experience is where I think a lot of this stuff should come into play. And that's why I think it's so important for people with autism to be as transparent, and especially if they're nonverbal, using behavior and using their experiences to communicate what their needs are.
Hi, Taylor. It's Tara again. There is another question in the Q&A. It's kind of similar to what you were just saying, so let's see if you can elaborate.
Okay.
Are there any suggestions to help with sensory overload while being on the bus or in the classroom?
Yes. Okay. So, a couple things. Earlier I was talking about tactile. Tactile is huge. Tactile. Okay. The reason why people with autism get so overwhelmed so easily is because when the brain is processing information, it processes things two different ways. It processes it either through information, so it's processing information, or it's processing an intake, so a sensory intake. And what happens is when someone is in a classroom or in a setting, their brains are typically able to kind of separate the two, and they're able to say, oh, so we're hearing information, we're processing this information, but we also hear this in the background. So they're taking two different things in, and their brain is able to distinguish between information versus sensory. And so they're able to process both. And unfortunately, with an atypical mind, they're taking this information in, and if they're not doing something tactile, then their brains are just overloaded with sensory. Because it's like, oh my gosh, you're talking, but all I hear is blah, blah, blah. And that's what their intake is, right? And next thing you know, they're like, oh, it's so loud, then it's so bright, it's so this, and they start getting that feeling. So that's where the oversensory issue comes in. So for me, if you can give someone something tactile, that's huge because that opens the door to cognitive awareness and cognitive intake. So now you're able to process information based on, is this something that I'm supposed to process, thinking wise, or is it a sensory situation? Because that's what creates the overwhelming sensation is not that the sensory is just so overwhelming. It is, but now you're also blocking the idea that if someone's talking to you, instead of processing what they're saying, all you hear is sound. So now if I give them something to tactile, that changes. Also, being able to control the sensory intake is huge. So when I was in school, and this was kind of the beginning of me becoming my own self-advocate. But when I was a child, um, in my classroom, we had a CD player that was kind of in the back of the classroom, and our teacher would play classical music. So she would put in, different CDs of different, like Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, all these, composers, and they would play, this music. Well, what I noticed is when she would put certain CDs in the CD player, and she would start the CD every day, right at the beginning of class, typically class times kind of came in sync with the sound, with the play track. So like we could get through two or three compositions in the first hour of school, and I noticed that when we got to that third song, it was getting ready to switch to the next subject, right? And so what ended up happening is I would, like on certain days, I would ask my teacher, could you play this CD? Like, could you play the Mozart one? Because I remember after three tracks, we'd go on to the next subject. Or, like, if I were studying for a test and I had that CD and you were playing it, I'd say, can you play that CD while I'm taking the test? Because that music allowed me to remember, because my sensory intake was also happening as I was taking in the tactile information. So both of them kind of connected. And so the sensory would then inspire the cognitive, which allowed me to remember. And so I took it a step further. And not only did I do that, but I had my teacher burn those CDs on cassette for me. So I'd go home and I would study to that music, and she would play it during tests and other things that would allow me to remember things more accurately because I had the music. But then I learned we had like a sensei in the back of the room. And what I noticed is like, okay, there's a smell in the room. I was like, but when I change to the next subject, in my mind, I should smell something different. There should be a different scent. So I started asking her, I was like, could you switch when we go from math to English? Can we go from lavender to vanilla? Just, I mean, just to, for me, and we just have it in the back. So that's what she would do. She'd be doing something and she'd walk to the back of the room and she'd switch the sensey parts. So she'd go from lavender to vanilla. And when she would do that, that change in smell would then register in my head, oh, I'm going from this subject to this subject. So not only would I hear the change in the music, but I would smell the change. And then we would associate it with color. So my math was a red folder, red pencil, red textbook, and I would smell cinnamon and we would play Beethoven. Then it would switch to Mozart and I'd go to English and I'd smell lavender and I'd have a purple book, a purple notebook, a purple folder, a purple pencil. It just worked. And it's controlling your sensory intake. So if you can control the sensory intake, then you're going to open doors, because not only are you now creating that sense of tactile information intake, Now you're controlling their sensory overload because you are minimizing the sensory issue. Because if I can say, I know when I do math, math is red. So I have a red notebook, I have a red pen, I have a red, textbook. I smell cinnamon and I hear Beethoven, it's math. So now I can transition from one subject to the other without that sense of transitioning as being an issue because I control it. It is no longer just, oh, we're switching things to switch it. I'm switching the environment. I'm switching what I see. I'm switching what I hear. I'm switching what I smell. And I'm switching what I'm learning. So you combine those two things and you're going to maximize potential majorly.
No more questions, just a statement how wonderful it was for you to have such a supportive teacher.
Yes. And it's like I said, this was kind of the beginning of me learning how to be my own advocate because I remember when I was in third grade and I was with my teacher, I was doing math. And anyway, we were doing just a couple math problems. And anyway, as we were finishing up, she goes, okay, well, I got to take this information and I have to go to your meeting. And I stopped her. I went, whoa, my meeting. What's that? And she goes, well, your IEP is today. And I said, my IEP. And I was like, my mom talked about that. She's coming to school for an IEP meeting. I said, what is an IEP meeting? And so she goes, it's your individual education program. And I was really interested. And I was like, so what are you going to talk about? And she goes, well, we're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about your school. We're going to talk about how you're doing in school. We're going to talk about how your grades are doing, and she mentioned all this. And finally I said, well, if you're going to talk about me, shouldn't I be in the room? And she kind of stopped and she looked and she goes, you got a point. She goes, do you want to go to your IEP? I said, yes, I want to go to my IEP. So I took my book and I put it back in my desk and I said, I'm going to my IEP meeting. So I went with my teacher and it was so funny. I walked into my meeting room. Here's the principal, the social worker, the psychologist, the gym teacher, my mom, my dad, the whole thing. Here's all these people. And I come traipsing in this room. I sit myself down and I looked at my teacher and she goes, would you like a copy of your IEP? And I said, yes. So she copies the IEP and puts it in front of me. I no more knew what this document was than the man on the moon. I had no idea. But to me, I was there because they were going to talk about me. And as they were talking about my goals, the teacher would look at me and she'd say, so maybe we should ask Taylor. What do you think? And then I'd say, no, I don't want that. Or there's a couple times when she said, well, what kind of accommodations do you want? Or they were talking about it and I said, can I have this? Or can we do this? I learned to advocate for myself that way. And I think that's so powerful if you continue to push kids to be a part of their IEP, even if they're nonverbal. Have them present when they're talking and address them in the room. Say, you know how good you're doing in math right now? You've learned how to do this and this. I said, isn't that great? And then say like, and guess what? You're going to be learning to do this soon, and really encourage them and just empower them, make them a part of their life. Because living with a disability, I can tell you, I've never felt like I've had complete control of my life. But when I take command of my life is when I feel the most independent and when I feel the most empowered. And that's what I think most kids and other people with disabilities need to have, is that sense of ownership of their life.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much for taking your time out today and presenting this important topic to everyone. I want to remind everyone that as you close out, there will be just a quick 2-question survey. If you would please take that survey so that we know what we can do to improve our webinars for you in the future. We'd appreciate that. Again, thank you so much, Tyler. And thank everybody for attending today. Tyler will get us his slides, and at some point within this next week, Tara will be forwarding that to you. We did record this, so the recording will also be available within the next week on our Silk website if you want to go back and listen to it again. I know that I want to go back and listen to it again. And for those that are attending the transition conference, Taylor is slated to be the keynote speaker. And I know you all will look forward to that. So thanks again. Thanks again for your participation. Thanks to closed captioning and our interpreters, and to Tara for all her help. Have a good evening, guys.
Thank you.